Hello, this is Peter, and today we'll look at Azure Active Directory for developers. In the early days of .NET, it was very common to build your own user system to authenticate and authorize users. Nowadays, there's a cloud-hosted solution called Azure Active Directory. To get started, the first thing you'd like to fix is make sure you have access to an environment that you own, that you're a global admin of. Because sometimes you have to grant permissions that you can't do, right? I can't do in the Microsoft Azure Active Directory because I don't have those permissions. You can either have a developer subscription, an Azure developer subscription, or the Microsoft 365 developer program. Right, so Azure Active Directory is a shared service amongst all the cloud services that Microsoft provides, and regardless whether you're coming from Azure or from Microsoft 365, you will both work with the Azure Active Directory as an identity store, which is also why it is been rebranded to be Entra, Microsoft Entra, and it even has an admin center that is dedicated to the functionality that you would expect from identity access. So you go to entra.microsoft.com, you'll find the Entra Admin Center with Azure Active Directory, with permissions management, and with verified ID. Maybe we'll run into those a bit later. If you're familiar with Azure Active Directory, you may recognize the app registrations that you have here next to users and groups and devices and a whole bunch of other things. In here, you can create a new app registration, right? Because you need something like an identity that can approach your Active Directory. Not everybody can query your Active Directory. You need to have an application registration and grant those credentials to your app. The app registration consists of a client ID or an application ID, client secret, optionally, and tenant ID, right? It lives in a certain tenant in an Azure Active Directory instance, you could say. And you can have permissions. We'll look at permissions a bit later during the consent section. Okay, to get started with Azure Active Directory for developers, there's tutorials. You can have quick starts, tutorials in all kinds of languages, right? And types of applications. So there's a different flow for web apps than for single apps, than for APIs, or if you are building native apps. In this case, we're looking at a web app in Node. Scrolling a bit down, you see ASP.NET Core, Java, Node Express, Python, and we'll dive into the sign-in users. What is interesting here is that there's additional columns for what are the authentication library that you're going to need and the authentication flow. So the authentication library is important because previously ADAL was used, right, the Active Directory Application Library, and now it's MSAL, Microsoft Software Application Library, which is the new thing, and if you're building new, you should use it, and if you're currently using ADAL, you should migrate. The flow is authorization code, and we can also look at that. Okay, so a bit more about flows is that depending on the type of app, you have certain steps that you want to take, right? Because you can imagine that if a web application is running on a server somewhere, that has a different security context than a single page application, which really is just a page that's downloaded to a client environment, such as a user's browser. And so you can't pass all kinds of things in there because you don't know what's going on there. So that's why single page apps are different, and each of those flows have different steps that you have to do in code, and it's all documented, right? And there's diagrams and samples. We'll look into the simple one, you could say, like the simplest step for a Node.js authentication sign-in scenario. Okay, so in Azure Samples, this is just public content, right? You can access this. And this is what I did to, and then there's a few things in there. So the app is not really that exciting. It's just a page, but it has the construct to sign in. And the important things are app settings, which is where you pass the authentication parameters and settings. And the app.js, that is the application entry point that will kick off loading all those things and then directing the user to the relevant environment. Okay, so let's switch to the code sample here. But first let's look at application registration, right? Because you can do that in the portal, but as you know, I'm a big fan of Azure CLI, so I think also we should be comfortable querying Azure AD. As you can see here, if you do Azure AZ and then AD, right, you're talking to Active Directory, and then apps, because you saw that you also have users and devices and groups, etc. And you can just ask for a list, and the output is in a table, because by default you get JSON, but that's not what you want here. To be human readable, right? In this case, you see that I have 3 apps first, then I do AZAD app create, right? You provide a display name and a web redirect URI, which is really important because this defines that it is a app registration of type web, and it has a return URL. So after authentication, where should it go? It should go here. Optional parameters I'm providing here is query the app ID, right? So I want the app ID back, which is this one. And then I can use that same app ID to get credentials, because in this case, my app registration also needs a secret or password. So for the same app ID, I'm creating a credential. And it's actually called reset, which can be a bit confusing. The good news, obviously, is that you can actually use this command again. Okay, so then the output is app ID and password and tenant, and these fields are the ones you want to add to your sample. In this case, I've also checked that my new list of app registrations contains one additional one, because I ran into a scenario where I created actually the app in a different directory. But here all this looks good. Then when we go to the code sample, here's the app settings field, right? So you can see here there's views and there's public. Public is just a couple of pages. Views is just a couple of pages. Some includes. It really is about the app.js that kicks off the app settings.js, and the app settings is here. So these values contain the same as I just generated. You don't have to care about those. You don't want to see me copy pasting. Just update them. Make sure you update them. And make sure when you're sharing secrets that you don't commit those to GitHub, right? You want to leave this as a placeholder when you're committing. Maybe just have a local readable, writable file in your app settings. Okay, and then when you go back to the browser, you can actually, or to the command line, you can first start the app. I had that in a different set because it is quite a long path. Then I already did npm install, and it's just npm start, so now it's running on port 4000. And then when we go to the browser, here in 4000, you'll actually see the app running, and I can sign in. And when I sign in, it asks me about the permissions requested at first time, right? And since I'm the admin, I can also consent on behalf of the entire organization, so that individual users don't have to do this. The app wants to view basic profile and maintain access to data I've given it access to. I accept this. Here you go. I'm signed in as my authenticated user, and if I go click on ID, I can find additional details about the claims that were in this authentication. Okay, so the last thing you want to check is the consent experience, because this is something that you are confronting your end users with, and you want to make sure that this is correct and that you're not asking for more permissions than you want to grant, right? Everybody knows the idea when you're installing an app, for instance, on your mobile phone, and it asks for the world on permissions. That's not giving you a good feeling. You just want to provide or ask for the minimum required permissions for the functionality of your app. Right, so this was a brief overview of the walkthrough experience, you could say, for developers, starting with Azure Active Directory. It may look simple like this because the app is running and registration is clear. Take your time for this. I would encourage you to start with a sample and then build from there. It's probably easier than to apply identity and access management after the fact in your own app. Maybe we'll look into that in another scenario. Thanks for watching.